Great. So good morning, everyone. Great to be back here, KCD New York 2025. Was anybody here last year, 2024? Okay, all right, about a third. That's great. So as Scott mentioned, my name is Daniel Krook. I lead developer experience at the CNCF, which means my team focuses on maintainer happiness, making sure that our 200 plus projects are happy at the CNCF. I'm a local too. I live in Connecticut. Came on the train early this morning. So I'm already tired. Feels like I'm halfway through my day. So Kubernetes turned 10 last year, and the CNCF, as its open source home, turns 10 this year. So through this talk, I'll take you through the past decade and start to look forward to some of the trends we've been seeing that may show us what the path is going to look like in the coming decade. So the CNCF was founded as the neutral home for Kubernetes, but it was always designed, even from the start, to have a broader portfolio of additional cloud-native projects. The first planning meeting started just over 10 years ago, late May 2015, and the CNCF was announced at OSCON in July. And the governing board and the TOC were formed later that year. And in fact, the very first meeting of the governing board was here in New York City at the New York Times building where our organizer Ahmed works. Do we have anybody here in the room from the original governing board or TOC? I know we have some. Oh, we got one. Somebody over there? All right, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for kicking off this amazing community. And thank you, of course, all in the room for carrying on that legacy of having an amazing community that's driven Kubernetes as well as those 200 projects forward. And it continues to be a great community with your support. Okay, so speaking of today, we've now reached a contributor community of over 250,000 developers contributing to Kubernetes, but also those 230 projects. I think we've had 32 new projects in 2025 alone come in to our sandbox. And Kubernetes itself, Kubernetes itself trails only Linux in being the second fastest grades velocity open source project out there. Beyond those 200 projects, we've also got about 2,000 maintainers spread around the world. And we do have large representation as well from the New York area. Scott Rigby, of course, the maintainer of Helm and Flux, and some other folks in the room as well that have been involved in many of these projects. So the East Coast, New York area is definitely well represented in our community. So going along with building on the Kubernetes 10-year celebrations that we had last year, we're kicking off a way for communities as well to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the CNCF itself. If you do want to host an event, we've got a QR code. You can get a party kit, or you can find, if you're not native to the New York area and there's an event near you, you can go check out to see where the other celebrations are happening. But you can request them up until June 15th, so you've got a couple more days to do that. And ideally, we'd love to show the community in action at KubeCon NA, which is happening in November. So get those pictures, show your celebrations, please. Okay, so let's take a look back at the last 10 years in a little more detail. So the roots of cloud native really take hold in earnest about 25 years ago when the mass uptake of virtualization starts to happen. And that goes through the broad adoption and use of containerization in 2015. Along this path, we've seen a move from proprietary solutions to open source alternatives to the point where today the default for many new products and services is actually open source, like Kubernetes, and all of the ecosystem of projects around that. So looking at this kickoff in 2015, as I mentioned earlier, the CNCF was announced, its governing structure was put in place, and Kubernetes was accepted as the first project. Shortly after that, Prometheus became the second project, and Dan Kahn was named the first executive director to really drive it as a neutral open source home for that and many other projects. The first Cloud Native Day happened in Toronto, and the first CNCF run, KubeCon, happened in Seattle later that year. And I see some familiar faces from that event as well here. In 2017, the first KubeCon EU hosted by the CNCF happened in Berlin. And the big news there was Rocket and Containerd came under the same CNCF umbrella. So they were competing implementations, but the CNCF was really a place for not picking winners, not being a kingmaker. And that's been a nature of the CNCF since. There's often, if you see the CNCF landscape, there's many competing alternatives to solving a particular problem. And that was always there in the DNA from day one. Later in the year, the first working group was announced, and that looked at serverless technology, how that related to containerization, and WebAssembly had its roots around this era as well. Building on that serverless momentum, we saw a boom in lightweight approaches containerization around 2017. Lots of different ways to run those workloads within Kubernetes, as well as in the larger open source CNCF ecosystem. Knative Cloud Events originated around this time, and Cloud Events is now a graduated project as of last year, starting from the early days. In 2019, we saw observability really start to take off due to the fact that microservices, the types of applications you're building on Kubernetes, have a lot of moving parts. So observability, finding out what's going on, debugging problems, was a huge issue to solve, and they were brought together under a single standardized pluggable architecture with the OpenTelemetry OTel project. Skipping ahead to 2021, eBPF, I can never say it, eBPF starts to provide a common way for folks to extend the Linux kernel for user space applications. So we saw an explosion of eBPF solutions for starting out with networking, working towards observability and security. So we see cloud native kind of working at various levels of the stack. On to 2023, Kubernetes was really starting to emerge the key, highly scalable platform for training AI workloads, as well as running the inference applications to support AI. Interesting fact, OpenAI actually had a keynote at that first KubeCon EU event in 2017, where they talked about how they were using Kubernetes to build some of their early applications. But around this time, it's when the chatbot era arrived, Kubernetes is really seen as the default platform for these type of workloads. 2024 was another big year for cloud native. There's a cloud native working group. They released a white paper. There are also various features now becoming available within Kubernetes itself to support GPU sharing, for example, and other tools for supporting LLMs start to join the CNCF ecosystem. And that brings us to 2025. In the latest Kubernetes release from a couple months ago, there were a few new features released, elastic index job, pod resizing, and other kind of tools in there to really support massive AI workloads. And this year, we're starting to see a convergence of AI development, which has been kind of a wild west of how do you take on this new model, how do you build applications, how do you run them? And what we're seeing is a convergence of these AI applications taking on the best practices that have been out there in the cloud native community for years. For example, there's a new sandbox project in the CNCF called KitOps, focused on AI and ML workloads, but it reuses the OCI spec to do that, to containerize models. We're also seeing agents in the Dapper project, so creating a programming model for workflows for AI agents, and that provides a way to integrate LLM into Kubernetes through a task resource. And again, it's showing the strength of how that cloud native infrastructure that's been out there for years is now being adapted to support these new workloads and continue to be a first-class platform for Kubernetes. Okay, and what we're seeing definitely this year is, particularly with the announcement of DeepSeek, is really a move towards open source models. As we had seen proprietary virtual machine virtualization technology in the past work towards an open source first approach, we're definitely seeing that as well in the open source world. There's been some churn around defining what does it mean to be an open source AI model. There's been some interesting discussions there, but this is really an area to watch, is the standardization, open source of AI models. Okay, so what does this all mean for a future of cloud-native AI? So to summarize, as with containerization and virtualization before that, these closed vendor solutions are going to be moving towards open source first, giving you lots of new options and ways to leverage lots of parts and build brand new applications using all the great features of open source development. Abstractions will emerge to manage complexity, improve integration, so making sure you can assemble new applications. And as I mentioned, the developer experience is going to continue to move and adapt to take advantage of all those open source cloud-native best practices we've seen over the last 10 years and drive the future of AI. Okay, so with that, I hope you have a great day at KCD NYC. And if you are interested, we have a whole bunch of upcoming events. Actually, this month, next week is Hong Kong. I'm not sure if anybody's going to make it there. Tokyo the week after that. India in August. And of course, KubeCon NA is in Atlanta this year as well. So hope to see you at any of those events. And thank you for having me.